Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. And so this video is called Examining Your Calvinist Podcast, Keith Foskey, Why I Reject King James Onlyism by Nick Sayers, and this is part 5. And so I'm just going to jump straight into this. Usually I'll waffle on for an hour and talk about all sorts of things, but what I really want to do is get into the guts of this. Now, we have quite a lot to get through. One reason that I'm going to jump straight into it is because I'm going to have to cut this video short. Maybe, short meaning it's going to go for about 2 hours instead of the usual. I think one of these videos went for 6 hours last weekend. And so I finished the Berg series examination, and it finished with a bang. It was quite amazing. Where we sort of dug up this old thing. It was in the Berg series, but Dan Wallace made the claim that the King James was based on 6 manuscripts, and which is amazing in itself. And then he said Westcott and Hort's text is based on 2,000 manuscripts in 1881. And he said that the text we're working with now in 1995 is based on over 5,000 manuscripts. It was just amazing. It was so amazing, watching this. And straight away, some people made memes about it, and it's quite an amazing thing to say. And so basically, I can understand why, if someone watched the Berg King James only so-called debate, why they would reject the King James position. But one thing that was of notice as well was when I was going through Dan Wallace's Credo course just recently. Every now and then I'll jump onto James White's material or Dan Wallace's stuff and just listen to a few old videos that they've done. Old meaning 10, 15 years old. And Dan Wallace actually said there were 4 representing the King James side. So he actually saw Art Fasted as being part of the King James side. So isn't this amazing? Where if you watch the whole video all the way through, you got basically, I think it's 5 on the modern version side, and you got 3 on the King James side. Now, we've talked about this. If you go back and watch the videos, we talked about this in nearly every video, how the deck was stacked and all the rest of it. But Dan Wallace, in his Credo course, said there were 4 on the other panel. And I thought, that's ridiculous. But then I thought, actually, in the end, he was arguing with Art Fasted about the majority text and how many texts we used and all the rest of it. And it sort of ended there, which was quite a strange thing. And I guess that's probably why it didn't really go to air, because Art Fasted actually started to make some very good claims about the majority text, which a lot of the time has Textus Receptus readings. And so, I thought that was interesting, listening to Dan Wallace talk about the Credo course. I think it was in his Credo course where he was, the title is something about the Textus Receptus. And so, but yeah, anyway, Dan Wallace had made the claim that the King James is based on 6 manuscripts, which is just blows my mind that someone who is supposed to be the world-leading expert on textual criticism and all the rest of it, thinks he's a Bart Ehrman or whatever. And then he said in 1881 they used 2,000 manuscripts. And I'm just like, don't you understand? They had a Lucianic recension. This was the whole theory of Westcott and Hort. Westcott and Hort said they had a Lucianic recension. Basically, to summarize that, Westcott and Hort said we are not going to go with the Byzantine text. But the vast majority of manuscripts are Byzantine. 99% of them are Byzantine. So Dan Wallace is claiming they did go with the Byzantine when their whole premise was to not go with the Byzantine. It's the weirdest, the strangest. It's got to be just deception. But yeah, then he claimed that the Bibles in 1995 were based on 5,000 manuscripts, which is just incredible. These type of lies are just amazing. And I think just that little section in the Ankerberg show, it should really show people the poor scholarship that's behind a lot of modern day textual criticism, because people revere Dan Wallace as a guru. He's making this type of claim, which is just amazing. It's like saying Hitler's not a Nazi. Hitler was never a Nazi, or something like that. It's so bad. It's like saying, Greta Thunberg never advocated for the environment. It's that bad. It's like, how can you say this? But this is the sort of thing that we're up against. We're up against people who will just say the most outlandish, weird, bizarre things because there's money involved. It's $1 billion industry. The Bible industrial complex. There's so many people making money from these modern versions. It's deception. And I think I'm so glad that I've stuck through it through the years, exposing these guys, exposing Dan Wallace, exposing James White, because these guys are just simply dishonest. Why didn't anyone else pull up Dan Wallace and say, well, hey, Dan, you've sort of got it wrong there. Westcott and Hort use mostly 2 manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They might look at a spattering of others, another 15 or 20 here and there, but they don't usually go with them unless Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have it. So they're really going with 2. They're not going with 5,000. Westcott and Hort rejected the Byzantine text, which is 99% of them. But then Dan Wallace will turn around and have the whole embarrassment of riches apologetic, which, Wes Huff, needgod.org. Many of these people talk about this embarrassment of riches, but it's so deceptive. This is huge deception, and I guess it's opened up a bit of an avenue for me to sort of try and find out who else has said this type of thing, or who else has been hoodwinked by Dan Wallace. But who else is saying this type of thing back in the 90s, back in the 80s, that Westcott and Hort used thousands of manuscripts. It's so strange. It's so weird. And so we have a few people. Nexus is in the house. Hey, Revolution, how are you? Yeah, I'm doing well. Wayne on Wheels is in the house. King James Onlyism. Well, I reject Egypt Onlyism. So that, yeah, that's if they were found there or written there. I mean, who knows? With Sinaiticus, I think people saying that it's a fake and a fraud have just as much faith as those who are saying it's not a fake and a fraud. Because until we actually scientifically test these things, we don't really know. That some of the best biblical scholars of today have looked at things and been completely duped about the age of things. And so unless they're scientifically tested, we don't know. Where people are taking it by faith that it's, written in 350, or the other, Sinaiticus is written in for 350 and Vaticanus in 360 and all this. That's taken by faith. So for someone to say, well, I think it was created in 1839 by Simonides, well, to me, it takes faith to believe that. I know there are some other people who have done quite a lot of research into it, and they will stand by what they believe on that. But I think it's just so much easier just to cut through all that and just test these documents. I think every biblical manuscript of any type of weight should be tested. And so Nexus says comments seem to go missing. I don't think so. I've never seen any comments go missing here. Wayne on Wheels, I have seen a couple of your posts then self-delete or something, Nexus. Okay, thanks. The KJV is fine, thank you. Wayne on Wheels says it's a deception. Some of those, they are calling manuscripts are smaller than an index card, barely readable. Yeah, some of these manuscripts are just like a scrap of paper. It could be anything. Some of them are as big as a credit card. And so who knows who wrote that? That could be someone saying, hey, if you find this reading in the Bible, you need to keep it instead of this other reading. And it could be the wrong reading that got it. That's the only bit that's left. And they're like, see, this is the oldest reading. Marcion was working against the scriptures, and he was destroying the scriptures. And so it's interesting that he was probably one of the biggest heretics of the early church. And Dan Wallace says that majority text people, including TR people, are modern day Marcionites. So what a great thing to say about people. So that's why him and Art Faster were having it out, because Art would have known that Dan Wallace said that he was a modern day Marcionite. Next it says Calvinists do not believe scripture, KJV. Some follow the King James. Sifted Sand says the dishonesty and inconsistency of textual criticism speaks volumes about the spirit behind the movement. I pray for them because many of them are saved brothers who are led to fight God's very word. And it is deception that causes them to do that. And usually it's anecdotes, these weird stories. They say, oh, you're into conspiracy theories and all this. No, you guys believe wholeheartedly in everything that anyone's ever said about Erasmus. And when you scratch the surface, it's like, hang on, they get even all the details wrong. And it's just some funny story some pastor says. Usually James White will just come out and he'll elaborate on something and say it in a debate, and people feel obliged to copy him. And it's just simply not true. There's so many things that have been debunked, but it doesn't seem like this. It doesn't seem like many text critics are correctable. When they're given information, they don't change their stance. Given certain bits of information, they just go on to a different topic. Jeff says, there's people out there dying in their stands and going to hell, and you guys have got nothing better to do than argue about which translation. Come on, man, preach the gospel. Like as if we don't preach the gospel. It's okay, Jeff, we can multitask. You don't just have to be all the time preaching the gospel. And the thing is, when I go out preaching the gospel and people come up to me with an ESV and say, hey, you have to marry a rapist, and they read it out to me in an ESV or an NIV, which says you have to marry the rapist. I mean, isn't that important? Shouldn't we teach others, hey, don't go out evangelizing with an ESV or an NIV, because atheists know these places where these Bibles are translated so poorly, you may as well have just got heretics to translate them. They're so bad that they will cause people to stumble. They'll cause them, it'll cause them to become like Bart Ehrman's. And so when I'm out there street preaching, evangelizing, handing out tracts and things like that, I want to make sure that people know that they can put their trust in the Bible, not that they've got this smorgasbord of things and they can just read whatever. And it says that Paul hopes legalists cut their genitals off. And in Galatians 5:12, if you don't know about that, you should study into it. But yeah, Jeff, I mean, we get that all the time. Why don't you do something else? It's like, well, we do. I mean, 2 hours of my week here talking about things. I do have a lot of other time. I talk to many people of many different religions and groups and talk about many other things. And so, it's just an accusation, which is really slander. And so you really need to, some people play golf. Some people, they go out and relax and go to the beach and have a swim, or whatever. I like doing this. And there's nothing wrong with that. I can go and preach for hours and hours and hours and hours. I can stand on a corner, hand out tracts around, and then I can relax by doing this. We can multitask. Sifted Sand says, God bless all in the name of Jesus Christ. Anchor David says, are there sources debunking Dan Wallace? If you go to the Ankerberg King James debate and look at the last 10 minutes, he says those weird things. And so I guess we're going to have to dig more into that and make memes about that. Wayne and Wheels says they won't let anyone test them, though. Yeah, that's true. They did go to test. I'm pretty sure it was it Sinaiticus or Vaticanus? They went there to test it, but then they were refused. I'm not sure about why. Be interesting to get to the bottom of that. Sifted Sand says, Jeff, we have all heard the same argument over again and again, that we should be preaching the gospel instead. I suppose Paul should have spent less time in the epistles exposing false teachers. Very good point. Like Hymenaeus and Philetus, Paul told us to expose the unfruitful works of darkness and reprove, exhort, etc., not just preach the gospel. And that's the thing. You have to sharpen your sword. You have to preach truth wherever you see it. And sometimes this can be a major obstacle to someone who goes, well, where is the Bible then? And I hear this all the time. People say, oh, the Bible's got contradictions. Christians say this. Oh, the Bible's full of contradictions. Well, there's just lots of problems in the Bibles, and only the originals are good. The rest of it's just all a bit of a mess. I hear this all the time. And so getting someone's confidence up in the scriptures that they can believe that God has preserved every word to them in the Bible that they have in their lap, that's a huge issue. And most of the other secondary issues, they fade away once someone puts their faith actually in the Word of God and believes that God has preserved that to them to that moment in time. Sifted Sand says, so your argument fails the biblical test. Can we share the gospel and defend God's true word? It's not just translational issue. This is literally the entire church falling to apostasy and doubt. Sifted Sand says, because of hundreds of false Bibles casting doubt on whether we have ever had God's word. Yeah, very good. Wayne on Wheels says, it's our modern day Tower of Babel. 160 plus translations, all based off Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, and the two don't agree. King James is in the house saying hello. Anchor David says, what verse is that where the victim has to marry the rapist? You should be able to just Google that. It's in the Old Testament. If you just type in, does a rape victim have to marry their rapist? I actually thought it was an atheist concept. I thought that people were saying like just some Richard Dawkins made up stuff or whatever. And they showed me the Bible verse. These atheists did. And I was like, oh, yeah, sorry, I don't go with that Bible, And I had to explain to them, I go with the King James, It's just amazing. And I could probably, seriously, if I became an atheist tomorrow and I went into a church where they're using the NIV or the ESV, I could probably show them maybe 100 verses that cause contradictions, that cause them so that they should denounce Jesus, that Jesus was a sinner, that there's so many problems. Where would you begin? But you can't do any of that when someone's using the King James. So Wayne on Wheels says, my brother in Christ, many of us do preach the word of God to the lost. We also gather here and learn how to combat the questions people have. Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. Apologists many times are using stupid arguments. Like they'll say, oh, we've got an embarrassment of riches, but they're going with the NIV ESV, which is based on basically two manuscripts. So they throw the embarrassment of riches under the bus anyway, but they use our argumentation for their presentation, which is a lie. It's deception. Because if you said, hey, Dan Wallace, where's this embarrassment of riches? It's like, oh, what, the Byzantine? Oh, we don't go with that. We don't even bother with that. Look at Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, So it's actually a bait and switch. It's deception. And apologists in America are trained to be deceptive in the area of bibliology. King James says, Jeff, this is the part about making disciples. Evangelism is different. We're to do both. We have to teach Christians what the truth is, since there is a devil and much deception. Ronald says, that's not my name, however. Wayne on Wheels says, Anchor David, there's not a verse like that. It wasn't rape. I'll have to find the verse one moment. Yeah, so basically the King James says they were consensual, where the modern Bibles say that it was a man forcing himself on a woman, and then she has to marry him. So it sounds like one of those Bethel churches, where you have to just stick around with your abusive wife-bashing husband, this sort of thing, and just trust God, and all this sort of weird stuff that happens in a lot of Christian circles. I mean, 95% of Christianity Christian churchy circles is fake. And Jesus said it will be like this. He warned about, he said, many will come in my name, deceiving many. So there's many and many. that's double fold deception, Wayne on Wheels says Deuteronomy, the two are mutual, sleeping together. If she was being raped, she would be screaming and found she wasn't. So you need to read both those verses. So yeah, if you read in the NIV and the ESV about that particular topic, you will find that issue. Okay, let's let Keith Foskey start.
God gave us. It's just not the facts. Beza shows us here that he was willing to make a change, and it stuck.
Okay, so he's talking about Revelation 16:5. He thinks that it shouldn't be in the Bible, where I've written a whole book on that, and it should be in the Bible. Keith is just kind of doesn't know anything about this. So I would say to Keith, if he wants a copy of the book, I can send him a PDF or whatever. But yeah, he's definitely completely trusting in James White's scholarship here, which is pretty dismal on this topic.
Unfortunately.
So he's like, this is unfortunately, like he really thinks that this is a terrible thing for Christians to read the Bible with the full name of Jehovah in it. So let me just sum up Revelation 16:5 for you. The Bible says, "Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be." So when it says art and wast and shall be, a lot of the manuscripts have art and wast and holy there. So ho'on kaho en kaho ozios instead of ho'on kaho en kaho esomenos. Okay, so the difference is the word holy or the word shall be. Now, when you understand that in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, it has 3 I ams mentioned. And it says, I am that I am. And then later on in the verse, it says, I am again. Now, the very next verse, God reveals the name of God. So what is the name of God? It is Jehovah in the Hebrew, Jehovah in the English. And oftentimes that's just brought across into an English translation as Lord, because that's what the people who were writing the inspired Greek text of the New Testament, many times when they saw Jehovah, they would just write Kurios in the Greek, which means Lord. So if you had an Old Testament Hebrew, they're writing out a verse and they're like, oh, it says Jehovah here, and they would just write Kurios in the Greek. God inspired those words, so that's why we do that. Now, the 3 I ams, it is the past, the present, and the future in these 3 I ams. So it's Yeh, Ho, and Va. That's basically translated as the one who what is and was and will be in the modern language, which in the King James is just art and was and shall be. So that's the name of Jehovah. The name of Jehovah is these 3 aspects of the past, the present, and the future. And it's Yeh, Ha, and Va. The 3 I ams add up to Jehovah or Yehovah. So it's pretty straightforward. So when in Revelation 16:5, when you have sort of like Yeh, Ha, and it doesn't have the final one, which is actually the Yeh is the future form, but Hebrew language sort of does everything backwards. But the future form, they've written holy over it. Why would they do that? Because it's the holiest name of God. So you can understand why someone will put holy there. It's a name. It's a huge name. It's the past, the present, and future, and it's more compact and more descriptive than the other names, which is the past, the present, and not in eternal future, but a coming, the one which was and is to come, sort of thing. So it's sort of like saying eternity past, present, and Christmas. It's coming. It's an event. Where Revelation 16:5 is the only one of the 5 triadic declarations that has past, present, and eternal future shall exist forever, which is exactly the name of Jehovah. The 3 I ams the etymology of Jehovah. And so I doubt Keith Foskey knows any of this. And so that's the thing, he's doing this class. Where would he get that information? He would only get this information from Textus Receptus people, or people who are experts in the Hebrew language. People who are on the critical text side just refuse to see this. What else can I say? They just refuse to see it. And there's not much I can do about that. I've shown many things. I've shown James White. Anyway, let's let Keith continue.
Also, there are others like that, but that's the most famous one. But the last thing in regard to the translators who translated the King James Bible, they're working from these printed editions. They're not working from handwritten manuscripts.
Okay, so this is a big thing that James White talks about. They didn't use manuscripts. They didn't look at manuscripts. They just looked at printed editions, which is not true. They did their own textual criticism. So yes, while they utilized the printed editions, and all printed editions is you might have a pile of 20 manuscripts, and you've examined all of them, collated them, and you're putting them into a printed edition. And so they were doing this with manuscripts as well, like before the age of printing. And so scholars would get 10, 15 manuscripts, look at them all, and create a one manuscript to rule them all, sort of thing. And so this is what was happening during the Reformation period. Many people were getting involved with this. And so but James White uses this as a bit of a gotcha moment where, they never went and looked at manuscripts. And I often say, like, how did they become experts in all these languages and know all this biblical stuff? But then all of a sudden they didn't look at manuscripts. It's weird, because James White makes out that they didn't really even look at manuscripts at all. They just went with the printed ones. But these guys were looking at manuscripts. They were in England, they had tons of manuscripts. And so it's not true. They looked at manuscripts. They did their own textual criticism. And so to do your own textual criticism, usually you're looking at manuscripts. There wasn't like a rule that said you cannot but look at printed editions, but that's what James White makes out. And so it's usually just to win a point somehow in a debate. But Keith Foskey is parroting this.
Translators of the King James Bible are working from the works of Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza, all of which are printed texts based upon handwritten manuscripts.
See what I mean? It's like, you got to get this to the people that there was only printed texts. You know what I mean? Like, as if Westcott and Horton, we're really going back to the manuscripts, sort of thing. Like where the King James guys, they didn't bother with that sort of stuff. They just slavishly, sort of translated what was in front of them. It's like they're just busy doing work, and someone just slips like a printed edition in front of them. They're like, okay, I've got 3 to choose from. Okay, well, we'll just have to go with this sort of reading. And that's the type of thing that is usually trying to get promoted here, where Westcott and Hort went right back to the original. It's ridiculous.
The same way today, if they translate a Bible today, they're not translating from handwritten manuscripts, they're translating from printed text, because that's what they have. That's the same thing that Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza are all translating from printed texts. And the printed texts that they are translated from all are different. None of them was exactly the same, because, again, you don't make an edition of something without making a change to it. So Stephanus had 5 editions. Erasmus had 5 editions. Stephanus had 4 editions. And then you have Beza's work. And so you go down the line. They still had to make decisions. And the original King James, and I have it again, I can bring it in here and show you. You can look, and there are marginal notes in the 1611 King James Bible where variant readings are in the 16.
So if they didn't use manuscripts, how did they know about all these variant readings? You know what I mean? It's just, but see, this, the thing is, I'm not scolding Keith Foskey for bringing this up, but this is James White's argumentation But then what James White does, he poisons the well. He talks about this. And then later on, he will say, well, the King James translators never went to manuscripts. They only went to printed editions. And it's like, you haven't proven that. But it's just something that these guys feel they have to bring up. So he's watched enough James White to go, well, James White thinks this is an important thing to bring up, so I've got to bring it up too, without really realizing that James White brings it up to poison the well. And so that's the only reason I'm really bringing that up, because he turned around and said, well, even modern people wouldn't really go with the original manuscripts that are there. They'd go with printed editions. James White would never say that. So that's the reason why I'm bringing that up. It's just a complete nothing burger. It's not even worth bringing up.
11. Now, they are not in the modern version, the modern King James, the one that's handed out and printed today, but they were there in 1611. I can just open it and just flip it to you and show it to you. So the history of this is not as simple as some people want it to be. And the argument...
At the end of the day, these guys didn't have a Bible in that time. There was no critical text-based Bible. There was nothing like what we see with Westcott and Hort in the Reformation period. They don't have a horse in this race, so all they can do is just point out, well, Rasmus has different readings to Beza, and it's like, yeah, well, there was a progression. Printing had only just started, and specifically with the Greek, printing Greek documents was rare. Aldous was doing it. Erasmus went and worked with him for 9 months in his print shop, and he learnt the ropes about printing Greek documents. He worked with Froben. They would have had to had 1,000 different Greek characters in the print shop. That's a lot of work. and at the same time, they're working out readings and all the rest of it. Now, printing had only really just started. So it took 100 years for everything to get ironed out. I often, people say, oh, where was the Bible before 1611? It's like, well, it was in manuscripts. But then a new technology came along called printing, and you have the ability to print these things and get them out to a lot of people. So instead, it also have people having to go to one library to visit one manuscript sort of thing. Now you can print that, and it's exactly the same as what everyone else is going to get. So they're all on the same page all of a sudden. And the King James was just the first place where all the words of God were all in one place between two covers. Where before that, you had, say, Beza to the New Testament. There were about 20 differences between that and the King James. And then you just keep going back to the editions of Erasmus, Complutensian, etc., Stephanus, and it got better and better. The text got more and more like pure. Now, I'm not into the whole, seven, number 7, purified 7 times. I don't think that, but the text definitely did get purified in a sense where people were just constantly working on it. Just like if we were to translate The Lord of the Rings into French, the first edition, there might be a few little hiccups here and there, and then you eventually it goes through a few people and you iron out all those problems. That's all that happened. And the King James was just the place where they ironed out all these issues. They ironed out all TR issues. They ironed out all the English Bible issues and all the Masoretic text issues, and they were able to put that in one book and give it to the people, and that was recognized as the best Bible translation. The Bible Societies used that and that methodology of translation for 100 years. So what people in the critical text camp are doing, they're actually mocking the good people who were part of the original Bible Societies, other Bible Societies, Trinitarian Bible Society, etc., using that same type of format, and they still do. They create Bibles that are based on the received text, on the Masoretic text, and they are to be akin to the King James. Their ultimate goal is to create something that is like the King James because it's the best out there. And these guys are saying that's rubbish. Erasmus slipped on a banana peel and hit his head on the bathtub, and Revelation 16:5. They just pulled it out of thin air, and all these weird stories. And so they have all these anecdotes and weird stories just to get rid of the King James. And so that's just what modern critical text advocates do, unfortunately.
And is that the Textus Receptus, which is the result of this work, is the perfect Greek text. But here's the part here's the last part of this. I do need to move on because again, I'm dealing with only one argument. But let me give you a little history on what is the modern TR. Because if you ask somebody the Textus Receptus, so you talk about the TR, you can order a TR. You can go to the Trinitarian Bible Society. You can order a blue-bound, case-bound Textus Receptus.
Now, I think we've actually gone through this section. I might have actually rewound it a little bit. Now, I'm going to double-check that. And so I'm just going to quickly open up my YouTube and look at the last thing that he was talking about, which I was pretty sure was exactly what we're looking at now. Or maybe he's just repeating himself. But I want to double check because sometimes I've done that. I go back and I cover another 10 minutes of what I've actually already covered. So I just want to make sure that we're not doing that. I don't really want to talk about this. Let's skip over it. So that's what they did. They moved that story to another place. And you can compare it to Scrivener. It's basically saying the whole entire verse. I would estimate there's been wars. So the elections will just bring out comment. Full link. Is he
possibly produced for the purpose of?
Possibly. Is he sure? Or is this just another? Okay, so let's just let this run.
Receptus. It's a Greek text. You got one? You have one? Anybody? Does anybody have? I didn't know if you might have one, Mike. Have a Textus. I know a lot of guys have them. The blue case-bound Textus Receptus. It is based on the work of a man named F.A.H. Scrivener, and it was put together not in the 16th century, not in the 17th century, not in the 18th century. It was put together in the 19th century, and it was put together based upon the readings that were chosen by the King James translators. So it is a reverse Greek text. Looking at what the King James translators chose, he produced a Greek text that would agree with it. And it does not have one manuscript in the world that reads exactly like it does.
Yeah, so we did go through this because we mentioned that it's not a back translation, by the way. It's 99.99% Beza's text. So him saying it's a back translation is just deceptive. And he's saying no manuscript in the world matches it. Well, no manuscript in the world matches the critical text either. So we actually have gone through this. So I just want to play it, but I don't want new people to think that I'm in agreement with him.
It just doesn't exist. Again, I sound like I'm building my case. I am. I'm building a case against this. This is fine. I don't.
No, he muddled these up. If you watch the first few videos, King James only basically covers everything. Anyone who doesn't believe in the critical text position is in a cult, but he divides it up as preference and onlyism, but he has already demonized everyone as an onlyist. And so, except for the first group, he said, I wouldn't even classify them as onlyists, but he demonizes majority text people, TR people. So they're all, and he's doing this because he's got KJV people in his church or people who use the King James. So he doesn't want to demonize them, but he wants to get them away from that.
I care about this. I care about this because it's not based on the history. I'll just read this to you. This is from TextusReceptusBibles.com, referring to Scrivener. In the latter part of the 19th century, F.A.H. Scrivener produced an edition of the Greek New Testament which reflects the Textus Receptus underlying the English authorized version. F.A.H. Scrivener, who lived between 1813 and 1891, attempted to reproduce as accurately as possible the Greek text which underlies the authorized version of 1611. You understand, he's working backwards now. He's using the English text as his foundation.
So just because the King James translators didn't print their Greek text, because it was so close to Beza's, there was like 20 differences, which is one difference every 13 chapters. So 60 of the world's best scholars at the time looked at Beza's work, said, look, we're going to go with your whole work. But there's just like 20 places where we're going to make changes. It doesn't really warrant a whole new translation. So all Scrivener did was go through those areas. He added another 170 places, which in Greek, he felt made a difference, like Nazareth or Nazareth. But they're going to be translated as Nazareth in English. It doesn't really matter. So 170 of these places are redundant. So only about 10% of the changes that Scrivener made were actually translatable, and that's about 20. So it's a pretty much a nothing burger.
And going back to the Greek and making the Greek agree with it. So now if you buy that TR, you're buying a TR which readings were purposely chosen to agree with the King James Version. That's backwards.
That's backwards. No, your understanding of what's actually happened is backwards. That's what's really going on.
But that's what it is. And you can buy one. Like I said, you can order one.
It's like, you can buy one, you can order one, but who'd want to? Because I just pronounce it, it's backwards, it's silly. I just said it's just the dumbest thing, on earth. It's like getting an NIV and creating a whole Greek text based on the NIV, I mean, he doesn't mention that the NIV actually, there were 200 places where the Greek text was amended according to the translation choices of the NIV committee, where the NIV committee came out with their text, which is the critical text, but there were 200 places. Like the ESV did this. ESV jumped the gun and said, well, in Jude 1:5, it should say Jesus there. So they went ahead and translated that, but the NA28 didn't come out until 2013, and they changed it as well. So were they changing it because of the ESV then, sort of thing? It's just, no, these things were well known. Keith Foskey just really doesn't know much about this, and there are certain sound bites that James White will say, and he just seems like he's repeating this. Any debate that James White does, he'll bring up, well, the Scrivener's text is a back translation, and it's ridiculous. And so whether Keith Foskey, I don't think Keith Foskey is being deliberately misleading here. He probably believes this. I mean, when I listen to James White speak, my alarms just go off straight away because he just lies so much. But Keith Foskey apparently hasn't experienced those type of lies with James White. Probably likes him because he's a Calvinist guy and all the rest of it, and says, things about Calvinism that he would agree with, and probably a few other things. And so it's like, well, he's right on bibliology. Everyone's saying he's the guru. And so he's, said a bunch of stuff about 1 John 5:7, Revelation 16:5, and now he's talking about this back translation sort of thing, and it's just ridiculous. Wayne and Will says his message is to deceive and cause division. It's planned and working. Yeah, that there's so much information out there.
I want to read a little bit more of this. It says, the authorized version was not translated from any one printed edition of the Greek text. The authorized translators or authorized version translators relied heavily upon the work of William Tyndale, which we're going to talk about that in a minute, because Tyndale's translational methods were used, not as manuscripts, but as he translated, and upward of 90% of the King James Bible reads the exact same as Tyndale's. And again, when we're talking about these differences, the differences are 1%, even in
in TR editions, but you can't compare your text that has 2,900 less Greek words and 8,000 changes to the Textus Receptus. When you're looking at Tyndale and Geneva and Coverdale and those type of things, yeah, that's a normal type of thing, but not this weird, strange. Let's just delete 6% of the Bible, and let alone all the changes. And so,
and the differences between the modern versions in the King James only about 2%.
No. Majority text is about 2% difference from the Textus Receptus. It's about 6%, which is a lot.
We're still talking about a very small amount of information. Anyway, the authorized translators relied heavily upon the work of William Tyndale and other editions of the English Bible. Thus, there were places in it which were unclear what the Greek basis of the New Testament was. Scrivener, in his reconstructed and edited text, used as his starting point the Beza edition of 1598, identifying the places where the Textus Receptus, identifying the places where the English text had different readings from the Greek. He examined 18 editions of the Textus Receptus. 18 editions of the Textus Receptus. 18. Hear that again.
So notice this. This is another James White gotcha moment or a Mark Ward thing. 18 editions of the Textus Receptus. It's like this. What he's saying means zero. It doesn't mean anything, because whenever I ask people who follow the Textus Receptus or they prefer the King James, I say, so which TR do you go with? And the underlying Greek text of the King James is what they go with. And so the text got further and further perfected till Beza's was just 99.99% there. And the King James just added that, 20 readings where it was like, well, we're going to go with this reading, this reading, this reading. And they looked at everything. They looked at all the manuscripts. They looked at all the language Bibles. They looked at all the English Bibles. They looked at commentaries, early church writings. And so they had the goods and the credentials to do that type of work. The thing is, these guys don't have any horse in this race during this time. And it's not like competing texts. You have the work of Erasmus, and then straight away you have a whole bunch of people doing independent things, working off what Erasmus has done. You have the Complutensian Polyglot as well. And then you have Stephanus doing his 4 editions, Beza doing his 5 editions. And so it's just a natural progression where he's trying to make out that they're all pitted against each other. It's almost like saying, well, you realize that, there's a whole bunch of Star Wars movies. Which one do you go with? And it's like, you know what I mean? He's trying to pit things against each other. It's like, no, it's a progression. The whole thing is a Star Wars thing. You know what I mean? And where's his Star Trek? It didn't exist then. It didn't exist until 1881. They don't have any horse in this race whatsoever. Vaticanus just sat dormant. Erasmus looked at it and gagged. He said it was rubbish. John Mill said it was rubbish. And so the whole thing of the Texti Recepti, different editions of the Textus Receptus trying to be a shock factor is a nothing burger. The thing is, the text got perfected, and it's the underlying Greek text of the King James, and the Bible Societies used that. They had that exact position for 100 years. And when Westcott and Hort were like, oh, we better show everyone where we've, chopped up our Bible, and compare it to the King James English, and I guess the Greek underlying the King James as well. We better show them where we've destroyed things. What did they do? They commissioned Scrivener to go back to the King James, to go to the underlying Greek text. So exactly what I'm saying. And so they're trying to make out that this is a weird thing, a strange thing. No, maybe every now and then someone like Doug Wilson will say, oh, I go with the 1550. Really, I don't think Doug knows what he's saying there. There's a few other people who might go with a different edition. I know some people say I go with the Elseviers edition, but usually for no apparent reason. It's just because they want to be different, or it's like saying I'm a mid-trib. It's like someone having a mid-trib argument or something like that, but they don't really know. Some people like that, they don't really understand what's involved. But the people who do understand what's involved are like, I follow the text that the King James translators used. Now, if Scrivener said that he has done that, some people believe that he's done that, okay? And some people think that Scrivener's Scrivener was a TR guy. He certainly wasn't. He was a critical text guy. I think he probably could have frisbeed that TR that he did and not even care about it. He thought it was just as vile and villainous as Westcott and Hort thought. But he did that to show the comparisons. But at the end of the day, if he never did it, I'd still be going with the same text. I'm going with the underlying Greek text, which is 99.99% Theodore Beza. And the other, 0.01% is in Beza's annotations anyway. The footnotes at the bottom of the page talking about all this sort of stuff and saying, well, it could be this, could be that, and then the King James guys went through all that, went, yeah, we agree in 20 places down the bottom here. We're going with those readings because we've done further examination.
Because you'll hear people say the Textus Receptus, the Textus Receptus. There's Textus Recepti. There's not a Textus Receptus.
It's just another gotcha moment, which means nothing. Because where was their text during this time? Where was the Criticae Recepti? It didn't exist.
There's 18 editions of it or more. There isn't just one. We've already shown that. We've got the work of 3 men going down the line. Scrivener in his reconstructed, edited text identified the starting point of Beza's edition, 1598, identified the places where the English text differed from the readings in the Greek. He examined 18 editions of the Textus Receptus to find the correct Greek rendering and made the changes to his Greek text. When he finished, he had produced an edition of the Greek New Testament, which more closely underlies the text of the authorized version than any one edition of the Textus Receptus. He produced a Greek text to agree with the King James Bible.
No. See, Keith Foskey's not talking about how much he did that. So it's a bit like, say, if you get Grandma's recipe and you taste Grandma's food and you're like, hang on, that's got a little bit of cinnamon in it or something. It's just got a tiny little something else in it. And so you go back through all her recipes and she just doesn't say that, that she put a tiny, a thimble full of cinnamon on top at the end for decoration or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention the decoration thing. Everything else. So really, it's just a nothing. The whole text of Scrivener is Beza's text, except for 0.01%. But if you were to listen to Keith Foskey, you'd think the whole thing was back translated. It's simply not. This is deception. It's deception. He's deceived. And really being a teacher on this subject, he should probably stop teaching this topic because I've found, I guess, maybe 40 problems with what he's said so far. But this whole issue of the Textus Receptus, he's just misinformed. And I understand TextusReceptusBibles.com. I helped with some of that website, but it just has the sort of bog standard, type of thing where it's like, well, Scrivener did this, Scrivener did that, where I used to think those type of things, but I've come out of them because they're just simply, a lot of it's just not true, or it's just oversimplified, or it just paints that whole situation in such a bad light that it's just, that they're not even, like, some of these guys are not even telling you that it's Beza's text with like a tiny trim around the mustache or something. It is Beza. With you holding up Scrivener, it's Beza. If you were to translate that into English, you would get the King James. And so it's like, but if you get Beza's and translate it, you would get the King James, except for 20 places, which is one change in every 13 chapters. So it's just the nothing burger. But he's making out, like, if you listen to him, you could think that how much percentage would be done, not 0.01%. You would think that they're back translating, like, maybe a good 20% of it. It's like, or maybe they've gone with a few other Greek things here and there, but a lot of it's just like, oh, well, the King James says this and that, and it's just a complete back translation. It's so strange. Helg says, hi all. Have a good Friday, Saturday. Coming in late again. Note that Foskey is trying to use the peanut differences between the TR editions as gotcha moments, pretending they did the same back then as today. But there are many times more differences between the TR editions and the critical text in just acts than there are between TR editions in total. Funny guy. Yeah, well, this is the thing. He's making out this is just such a huge deal. And then because they're focusing on something that's so microscopic that most people don't even know about it. Most people don't. Like, I've done the study into it, into differences between Beza and Scrivener, differences between Beza, the King James, where I think Scrivener did a good job, but sometimes he did unnecessary changes in Greek. But the vast majority of what Scrivener did is not translatable. 170 changes out of 190, I think, are untranslatable. And so, and I've written about that. I've talked about that. But then he'll turn around and say, they're so close. The text, even the modern text, is so close to what we have. You know, the King James is so close to the modern text. And it's like, well, why don't you just stick with that then? If it's the same, if there's no doctrines changed or whatever. But we know there are tons of things changed. There are tons of doctrines changed. He just refuses to acknowledge this. Or he's just been deceived by the critical text advocates. Helg says he has an agenda against the concept of a perfect text. Yeah, unfortunately, you can believe that, say, the Harry Potter series can be translated into German, and if you asked a German person to go through and proofread it, they'd say, "Oh, that's fine. It's a perfect text." But you can't do that with the Bible, apparently. There's just all this. They're always throwing dust in the air when it comes to, well, you can never translate anything properly, or you can never really get to the bottom of this and that. Or there's always going to be a problem, a print error here and there. And it's like, okay, so you can do Harry Potter, but you can't do the Bible, Anchor David says, hopefully his students will discern the info from his biases. I mean, I think the whole class is basically modern critical text, and there's a couple of people who prefer the King James there, where he wants to call them King James preferred and not King James only. And he's basically, what he's doing is, see, a true King James only doesn't care about the Textus Receptus. They think that Jesus, redid it. He re-inspired the text in 1611. So that they have no interest in the Textus Receptus. They're like, well, God moved again. Just like the originals were back then. Well, God's got involved, and here we have the Bible again. Like, you didn't need these 60 guys to work hard and learn all these languages and all the rest of it. You just needed one person, I guess, to turn up and just go, here's the Bible. And God did it, So there's no labor of men. There's no scholarship. There's no thought. That's what true King James onlyism is. And pretty much everyone rejects that. But what they do is they blur it and say, we think that you're like that, as well. And, when these guys talk to you, they'll talk to you as if you're one of those people. It's like saying all Calvinists are Westboro Baptists. They hold the sign saying God hates fags. And why do you pick at funerals? Why do you bash your wife, sort of thing? Why do you pick at funerals? Why are you a King James onlyist? And I'm like, well, I don't know. How are you classifying me? And then they're like, well, you've got a King James on your shelf. It's just so weird. But you know what I discovered? You know how on the Ankerberg series, the last 10 minutes of the Ankerberg show where he does that big King James debate, Dan Wallace said that in 1881, Westcott and Hort used 2,000 manuscripts, it's the funniest thing I've ever heard. It's the most deceptive thing I've ever heard. It just blew my mind. Okay. But I was thinking during the week that means Westcott and Hort, majority text people, which James White classifies as King James onlyists. So Westcott and Hort were King James onlyists. That's how dumb all these classifications are, and how weird it is to follow someone like Dan Wallace. Westcott and Hort, how's this? New announcement, Westcott and Hort are King James onlyists. Did you know that? Oh, dear. No, Westcott and Hort used about 2 manuscripts. They had a few others there just to, give it a different haircut. And like Joe Chambers said, they probably used about 50 manuscripts. And Dan Wallace said, no, we used 2,000. Said Westcott and Hort used 2,000. That's what he said. I can't believe it. So Westcott and Hort were majority text people then. Westcott and Hort, according to James White's category system, are King James onlyists. You can't make this up. No wonder people are confused about this. Baptist Jim says, very unlikely. I think that's talking about people seeing through what Keith Foskey says here. Well, it seems like people are being shamed. You got a ridiculous bibliology if you follow, Scrivener. If you follow the Scrivener text or Beezer or King James or Erasmus or whatever, they're all idiots, And so, don't follow them. Just follow the reasoned people like Jesuit Carlo Martini, or the Jesuit who's worked on the Nestle Alarm 29th edition. He worked on that, or the Unitarian who worked on Westcott and Hort's edition. Baptist Jim says, I'm doing a deep dive into defending the King James only, reading so many books. Westcott and Hort were cross-dressers too. Okay, I'm not really sure about that one, but they definitely hung around Unitarians and defended Unitarians. It's like having Jehovah's Witnesses as your best friend, and you're just saying, hey, this guy's so good, let's have him on the committee. So they did. They had him on the committee, and he wrote a book saying that doctrines are changed. He was on the committee. He would know. Westcott and Hort were lizard people. Changed my mind. Yeah. They accused my pastor of being in a cult. Okay. They were in a college proof that dress in drag. Yeah, I remember someone putting up pictures. Yeah, there was a whole bunch of people. And isn't it weird that, sometimes you're going through a school or whatever, and they have like a teacher's night where they're having awards or whatever, and all the bloke teachers dress up in drag or something, and it's like, that happens a lot here in Australia. And it's like, really? This guy's been teaching me math all year. He just seems like the most boring guy, and now he's dressed up like this. It's like, okay, whatever. Okay, David Daniels has it in his book. Oh, cool. I'll have to check that out.
So, yeah, that happened. And so you have to ask why. Why? Why would something like that happen? It happens because we have an a priori commitment to an English text.
No, it happens because the new kids on the block have come on the scene. They want to get rid of the King James. They want to get rid of the Textus Receptus, and they have to use deception to do that, because if you were to accurately compare these two texts, the critical text is just an abysmal like vomit. It's just a vomit of a text. It's so full of problems. God was manifest in the flesh is changed to who appeared in a body, creating the biggest solecism in the whole critical text. It has a predicate without a subject. It's a terrible reading. It destroys the deity of Christ. It's the strongest verse for the deity of Christ in the Textus Receptus. It's in the majority of readings, so they shouldn't have a problem with it, because they have problems with 1 John 5:7. Oh, it's not in the majority, so they become fascinated with the majority text all of a sudden, but tons of other readings that they don't care about that. And so their text is just like, seriously, when they talk about their text, in my mind, I'm thinking like Jehovah's Witness type a level of respect for their text. for versions based on it, it's like if you got the New World Translation and sort of made it more Trinitarian without trying to make it obvious. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. The text is, I call it the Unitarian text. The Westcott and Hort text, Unitarian, George Van Smith worked on it, heretic. So you should just throw it out straight away. That should be the biggest alarm bell. But, it's, they're academics. That's fine, sort of thing. No, it's an abomination. Brandon says, you're about the pastor in Canada that was thrown in jail for not apologizing at a event in Calgary. Oh, did I hear about the pastor? No, I didn't hear about that. Yeah, I mean, even here in Australia, I'm pretty sure it's in Australia here, there was a woman who stood up against men being in women's sports, and she has to pay a $95,000 fine in 1 month, or else she gets a whole bunch of other fines. And it's like seriously, people are over this rubbish, but the woke stuff is still lingering on. And so they were closet Catholics. Yeah, the only reason that I'm a little bit standoffish with some of the things about Westcott and Hort is some people, what they do, some people are bad. And they it's like saying, well, Hitler was also involved with satanic rituals and killed and ate baby brains. And it's like, okay, where's the proof? And so I guess the thing is with Westcott and Hort, like I've read lots and lots of stuff about them, and some of it's just sort of made up. And so that's where I'm like, and usually critical text people go, hey, that's made up about Westcott and Hort, and you can easily prove it's made up. Or there was another guy who was in the occult called Westcott, and sometimes it's actually to do with him. So that's why I'm a little bit standoffish, and I only just go, well, I can prove 100% that Unitarian George Van Smith worked on the committee. That's bad enough. Like it's like having a Jehovah's Witness work on your Bible project or whatever, specifically if you're going to the Greek and you're deleting all these words and everything and changing Trinitarian verses and all the rest of it. So that's why sometimes I'm a bit standoffish with some people and what they say about Westcott and Hort. I'm like, well, if I was to do any type of presentation on Westcott and Hort, I would double and triple check where I get that information from. I think Gail Rippling has said a few things over the years, and what it does, it causes people to just throw everything out, where I'm trying to go from the other end and go, well, this is 100% provable. Everyone agrees with this. Let's stick with that. And slowly I'm going through their material and going, well, this also is 100% provable, and I'm going with that. Now, I'm not saying other people haven't done a good job and I just don't know about it, like David Daniels and others, but that's just where I'm coming from. And so I think you can respect that. Brandon says, Brother Spencer did a video. Okay. Helg says, compared to the TR, the critical text is a drag queen version, the Tutti Frutti version of the New Testament text, a very colorful text. Well, I call it a translation. The things that are based on a translation, because they're just moving. They're like the word transportation just means you're going from one place to another. It's a transitioning, it's a translation, it's always moving. It's not stable, but they call themselves the standard text, like as if it's just advertising. A standard's got to be a standard. The King James is a standard. Their text, the standard text, according to who? And how can you change a standard text like every 10 years? Anyway. Brother Daniels has a book about Westcott and Hort. He had Brother Brandon on a video too. It's all good. All right, let's continue.
So we're willing to go back and make the Greek agree with it.
No, that's not what happened, Keith, and you need to stop saying that and probably apologize to your class at least. And you got this on I wonder how many people have seen this online. We've got nearly 10,000 people have watched this. How many people are being deceived? by this wrong information.
That's backwards. That is absolutely working backwards.
Yeah, if you believe the conspiracy theories, but obviously you need to do some more research into this, and you'll realize it's not working backwards. Just because the King James guys didn't print a parallel interlinear, Greek, Hebrew, English, polyglot, interlinear sort of thing, it doesn't mean that anything's nefarious or bad, or just because Scrivener attempted to do that type of work 250 years later, and people go, oh, that's pretty close, there's nothing wrong with that. But you're making out that it's like one of the worst things. It's backwards. It's not. It's really a nothing burger, but he's making out it's one of the hugest deals ever. And you've got to think there's people who are in this audience who prefer the King James, and he's obviously trying to shame them to get away from the King James position.
So that is, when I say the weaknesses in the manuscripts, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
What do you mean weaknesses in the manuscripts, like Vaticanus? Or no, he's talking about the 99.99% of all manuscripts are just rubbish, according to Dan Wallace, and apparently Westcott and Hort used them. How strange. And according to James White and others. But Codex Vaticanus says that Jesus, while he was on the cross, got stabbed. We all know that story. They pierced his side and fulfilled a prophecy as well. But then he kept talking, according to Vaticanus. Why doesn't he go with that reading, if that's the oldest and best?
Now, the next part of this, and this is from your textbook. I'm just going to read a quote from your textbook.
Helg says, so Brandon said, just like the New King James, Helg says the NA 28 is the standard text of the last 5 minutes until the NA 29 comes out. Yeah. King James says, Curtin Barbara Allen said Westcott and Hort worked from printed editions and not from manuscripts. Were they lying? And I think Keith Foskey did say that eventually, like he sort of made out it was a huge deal that King James guys did that. And then he said, well, of course they do that in the modern era as well. And it's like, oh, well, James White would not say that because he would want to use that as poisoning the well. So later on, you can just go, oh, no, they just slavishly followed Beza or Stephanus or Erasmus or whatever will win him a debate point. Anchor David says, another book, Defending the King James Bible by Reverend D.A. Waite, Director of Bible for Today. Yeah, that came out in 1992. And I'm pretty sure I've got that right here. I've got that one right there. That was one of the first books I ever got, actually, on the King James issue. It's a tiny bit dated now, but it's worth a read.
It is also important to remember that the four most valuable witnesses to the New Testament text, which are Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and...
Who says these are valuable? All the way through history, people have said they're just rubbish. Now they're the best. So if you have, four of the best football players, but just last week, they were all just sitting on the bench. They're just useless. You throw a ball at them and they can't even catch it. You throw a ball at their head and just smacks them right in the face. They're so hopeless. But now they're the best. Why? Because they've been proclaimed as the best. A bit like we're talking about the whole woke culture. Some people, they're just nothings. And then if they dress up in a certain way or, put a bit of makeup on or whatever, then they're the best all of a sudden. And that's what we see here. Westcott and Hort just changed the parameters, where true scholarship was saying these things are rubbish. Vaticanus is just trash. Dean Burgon's looked at Sinaiticus and gone, this is rubbish too. He collated about Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, looked at them and said they're rubbish. Foskey said they were rubbish. I'm not saying these guys don't have all their own problems, but scholarship has looked at these and said they're rubbish. So now it's like, no, they're the best, and it's just unquestioned. They're the best. They're standalone. They're special. They're like, they're like the Camilla Harris of manuscripts. They're better than everyone.
The Ephraim manuscript were not available when the King James translators was made. So when you read in your modern Bible and it says the older manuscripts have this, it's talking about manuscripts from the first millennium. The vast majority of manuscripts used for the King James are from the second millennium. That's why it says the older manuscripts. They are older. There's no doubt about that.
So he's making the claim that older is best. Okay. So when we get a corrupt text like Codex Bezer, why doesn't he go with Codex Bezer? Or why doesn't he just go with Vaticanus? Or just go with Sinaiticus? Or just go with the Framing Rescriptus? Why doesn't he just go with that? Well, because they've got really weird, strange readings. Yeah, they have apocryphal readings. Yeah, they have Gnostic readings. Yeah, they have... They're corruptions. And they differ from everything else, including these other weird manuscripts. So it's like getting the kid who's like 7 foot tall and the guy who's like 2 foot tall, and someone who's not all there, and all they're impaired in some way, and go, well, this is our new soccer team, they're the best. And it's like, well, why don't you just go with the average, consensus and look at 99%? Why are you throwing out the 99.99% and giving the achievement award to these guys? Well, obviously they can't even run, or you throw a ball at them and it hits them straight in the face. They can't do the same as the others. The others, but then they use the same apologetic. Oh, the embarrassment of riches. We've got all these manuscripts everywhere, and isn't it amazing? No, that's the TR argument. You can't use that for yourself. You have a whole bunch of weird, Danny DeVito, Arnold Schwarzenegger type of things, and it's like they don't match each other. They're not even close to each other. And so they're aberrations of history, and they should just be seen as aberrations, and they should be rejected. Like Codex Bezer, when he donated his manuscript to the Cambridge Library, he basically just said, look, this is interesting, but don't use it, sort of thing. Would be to God that people today did that to Vaticanus, did it to Sinai. There's a ton of these that are just weird. We need to just get rid of them. And we need to give the achievement award to the ones that actually have been doing the hard work. you know what I mean? The ones that actually do the proper job, which is the Byzantine.
Doesn't make them better necessarily, but they are older. Now, some will say the older and better manuscripts. Well, there's some debate about that. Well,
at least he knows that.
Because there's arguments about historicity and where it came from, those things. But there's no doubt that they're older.
So the thing is, when you get something that's older, the last 12 verses of Mark, only Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't have these. Everything else has it. Early church writings have it. So what everyone else was using something that had it, except for Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So shouldn't we, even on that point, say that these are weirdo manuscripts and they're not fitting in?
So, the King James Version is working on a smaller number of manuscripts. That's the first reason why I argue.
Amazing. Anyway, I'll read some of these comments. Like, just they've gone with a smaller number of manuscripts. I'll just read these comments. King James says, I don't believe King James translators only work from printed editions. Where's the proof for this statement? Many manuscripts were held at the British Museum, so wouldn't they consult the manuscripts? And the thing is, these guys were considered experts in all of these fields, including what would be considered then like textual issues. I guess they just did this without looking at manuscripts. you don't get someone who's like, one of the main guys of a university who knows all about manuscripts, who's never looked at a manuscript. It's just these dumb stories just don't add up. When you get what they're saying and you bring it into the realm of reality instead of scholarly waffle, it just doesn't make any sense. You just left there scratching your head going, hang on, how can, like, Henry Saville, when he collected 15,800 manuscript sheets to create the complete works of Chrysostom, he went through Europe, buying all these manuscripts. Like, surely, if there was a biblical one out of the corner of his eye, it's like, a little bit of porn there or something. He's like, I can't look at that, because he's only looking at Chrysostom. It's this type of weird thing. He would have been in libraries. He would have been looking at things. These guys would have seen tons of. It says in the dedication to King James, they looked at everything. These guys looked at everything. They went through everything. So these guys would have gone through Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza for breakfast. They probably would have done all that without even being invited on the translation committee. You know what I'm saying? And then they're not going to look at manuscripts? Yeah, how can John Boyce become such an expert on the Septuagint if he's not looking at manuscripts? And write a commentary on the Septuagint. How can he do that? Anyway, it just doesn't make any sense. King James says, oldest and best, the incessant lying, and that is what it is, of the New Version crowd is irrefutable proof that nothing they say can be taken seriously. Helg says, modern scholarship sets the standard as to what is okay. Yes. They just say this is the best, this is the oldest, And the thing is, Keith Foskey, he's saying these are old manuscripts. Nobody doubts that. Yes, even people in your own field doubt it, but they go with these older datings because why let these other pesky things get in the way of a good story? And why would you date, Sinaiticus as 800, which some people have, when you can say it's 350, because you got this story about Constantine and 50 Bibles and all this other stuff, and it's like, you've got to squeeze it into that story, and you've got to have the Lucianic recension. So it's just a muddle of stuff. So it's not really scholarship. It's like an art form, and it sort of tends to lean in your favor. Why not test these? So the thing is, if I was a critical text person and I really believed these were that old, I'd probably save up enough money to go and get these things tested. Like hire my own team and go in there and test these things, and then go, the ink is this old, and the paper, parchment or whatever, it's this old, and test these things. But they don't really want that, because I think at the end of the day, testing these things is most likely going to prove that these aren't as old as people think, and then it's going to be against Christianity, But isn't James White like, we've just got to go with the truth wherever it leads? Except for these pesky facts that would completely destroy their position. And I think that's going to happen. I think we're going to get to the point where people are going to start using true science, not pseudoscience, and these things are going to be tested. Like Nehemiah Gordon, he tested the amulets of Vaticanus. I've interviewed Nehemiah on this show, and I've done programs on the amulets, and he tested those inks and proved that they were from the Reformation period. Now, he actually tested the actual ink, but I think he has to be a little bit quiet about that. So these amulets are from the Reformation period. They're just dots on the side of the page sort of thing. But there were some things that were written over, but he had to prove that the written over ink and the other underlying ink were different. And he gave the chemical composition for both. So inadvertently, he has dated Vaticanus. And I think all we need to really do is just have someone who knows the science behind this to examine that, look into other works done in certain periods with that type of ink, and then you've got a roundabout date for Vaticanus inadvertently. So it's going to be interesting to see the whole critical text thing fall to the ground. And what will happen, and mark this date, it's the 6th of December 2025. And you can say, I remember I was listening to Nick Sayers, 10 years ago, and he said this would happen. The whole thing is going to crumble like a house of cards. Science is going to actually disprove the critical text. It's going to uphold the Textus Receptus and the King James. And then you're going to become just like all of this information is just going to become redundant. And like, it's a bit like when 20 years ago, you knew all the conspiracy theories that people are talking about now. And you're like, oh, this is happening in the military industrial complex and, the 9/11. And you know all this stuff. And now everyone just talks about it like it's just normal. And your whole conversation is just gone. What you say now is just of no importance, and people think you got it from some YouTube thing like this morning that's popular or whatever. Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, and you're like, well, I've sort of known like their stuff. Ron Paul was saying their stuff like 20 years ago. It's not new, but now it's just become popular, And I think the whole critical text thing is just going to collapse. I mean, like in all seriousness, I thought it would be a bigger fight than this. The more that I get into this, it's actually really easy to debunk. It's just most things just have a facade of being technical. The critical text position is so easily debunked that I'm like, this is like saying, what is it like saying? What's something that everyone could agree on? But I guess the problem is with pseudoscience, we see in the medical industry, like people are still going out and getting stuff shoved in their arm because some guy in a white lab coat told them they have to do this. And so that's the problem. People have this mindset of authority. And so you sort of need to set up a whole nother new school of authority. But I mean, I guess that could happen organically. A whole bunch of new scholars who just come on the scene. But the thing is, they're not creating a text, so there's no money involved with this. But yeah, anyway, interesting. Brandon says 400 years plus King James perfect word of God over the 1,800 modern fake Bibles. Excuse me. Yeah. And that's the interesting thing is when I'm overseas or when I'm teaching something that can seem controversial, I use the King James and say, well, people have been reading this Bible for 400 years. It gives you weight instead of like, well, this is the new ShamWow thing, and hopefully the translator was saved, and it just, like, people's confidence in the Word of God is just shattered. How do they expect people with disabilities for struggle to try 5 different Bibles when you've got King James, when all you have to do is look up words kids understand it? Yeah, and look, I'm not one of those people who says, hey, there's no problems in a sense of readability. I'm a realist, and I do challenge people who say, no, it's completely readable, completely understandable. I know Mark Ward does this and tries to convert people to a critical text position. But what he's doing is using a certain element of truth that some people don't understand the words. When you talk about, if I was to bring up a certain verse and just ask you, what does this mean? And you couldn't look up anything up and you just had to give an answer. Sometimes it's interesting to see people who are, King James only, King James leaders, people who run societies and things like that. And they make videos, and I'm like, no, that's really bad. That you should know that that's not what that word means anymore. It's been redefined. So, but see what Mark Ward's done. He's like, oh, we got these false friends and all the rest of it. Now, if they genuinely were like that, I could just agree with him. But he adds like hundreds and hundreds of words that just simply aren't. There's no problem with them. But even King James people admit this. Like, that's why you have D.A. Waite doing the defined King James, because some things, have fell out of usage and all the rest of it. That's just a normal thing that happens with an old book, So sometimes there are words that can have different meanings. And that's fine. But I think we've got to acknowledge that. We shouldn't have a reaction against someone like Mark Waugh. Just because Mark Waugh came on the scene doesn't mean we have to react or overreact to him. Or like the whole concept of just updating a bit of spelling here and there, or updating a few words here and there. I've got no problem with that whatsoever, because the King James that people read today, like the Blaney edition, like Luke 21 says accompted, where modern King James says accounted. Like, it means exactly the same thing, but they did that type of work, and so that has to be acknowledged. And if they can do it, well, why can't they do it today? Oh, because of Westcott and Hort. Well, that's a reaction. And so I've got no problem with things being updated, but not like updated and going to a different text or having a different definition and that type of thing. And so, but, the whole thing of kids understand it. Yes, the vast majority of the Bible can be understood. But I have had times in my life where we've done Bible studies. I remember this guy, he was studying law. He was very interested in the law for some reason. He probably should have gone to a Seventh-day Adventist church, but he sat in a few Bible studies and there was a pile of Bibles. He grabbed a King James, and when it came his turn to read, he was struggling. And everyone could tell. So someone just because at the time we were at New King James type of church, someone gave him New King James and he just read through it like perfectly. And I thought, things like that just show me like some people do struggle with this. Like, I don't. I can read through I read the King James 1611 online, like the actual 1611 document with the old font and everything, and I'm fine with that. But I'm not going to say that some people don't struggle with it, because I spent years and years and years and years studying this topic, and I would go through and listen to the audio Bible and read the King James. And anytime I came across a word which I thought was a little bit, interesting, or that's a different way of interpreting something, I would go and look it up, grab the dictionary, study it, think about it. And so when someone like Mark Waugh came on the scene, he's like, oh, there's words that sometimes you don't know are changed, and it's like, or you don't know that the meanings change. And I'm like, yeah. D.A. Waite would have been like, yeah. Even Chick Tracks, they got a word lists of, this word means this and this word means that. So no one's in disagreement with that. But it's just that he comes on the scene and says, go to the New King James or go to these other Bibles, not pointing out that there's tons of problems with those. You're going to something that's inferior. The New King James has lots of problems, and I read it for many years. I know the problems in the New King James. That's why I go to the King James. But I've got no problem with updates. So I just sort of make it known, make it clear that you exactly what you're getting when you listen to me. Brandon says the King James translators knew more languages and modern scholars. Yes, Lancelot Andrews knew 21 languages, 15 European languages, and 6 ancient languages. Very scholarly man. King James says it appears 200 plus years later, Dean Burgon was handling the actual manuscripts when he demolished Westcott and Hort. Yeah, and Dean Burgon had the bullets to absolutely destroy the concepts of Westcott and Hort. Brandon says the translator to retouching in the shed blood faith is his blood of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Don't they know they come from Gnostic texts? Wayne says Mark Ward has done a lot of damage to if people even have thus saith the Lord. Yeah, and Mark Ward, he's disingenuous. So he's pretending to try and help the situation, where all you really, like, if you struggle with words and that type of thing, D.A. Waite's done a good job. Trinitarian Bible Society, lots of these guys acknowledge that, and they've worked on things. But yeah, anyway, Anchor David says the word must have 4 definitions. One is elephant herd. Must. Yeah, grace has 14 modern definitions, which is interesting. Wayne says must also means elephant herd. I didn't know that. I have 1611 in eSword. Okay, so is that must as in it appears in the Bible, the word must? Brandon says Mark said also that do your pastors know, and I commented on X and told him our pastor knows the words in the King James just fine. Yeah. Anyway, let's continue with this critique of Keith Foskey.
That it has a weaker, has weaknesses. Again, some people get upset when you hear the word weaknesses, but that's what I mean. Number 2, the King James maintains readings. I'll get that. That's probably for me. I'm just kidding. Number 2, the King James maintains readings which some aren't going to like me say that. I'll say it. Which are not part of the original autographs. Now, you may.
So he seems to know what the original autographs are saying, which no one, even Munster, they've given up the whole thing of going back to the original.
They write that differently, which assumed to not be part of the original autographs.
And so just so you know, I'm recognizing now that I've actually gone through this part because I remember critiquing this, but I should have really double checked everything this morning, but there's not much I can do about it now. So let's just continue.
The most obvious one to me is 1 John 5:7. And I'm very aware that entire books have been written for the purpose of defending 1 John 5:7. But here is what the facts are. This is known as the comma Johannium. It is one small line in 1 John 5:7 where the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, and these three are one. That sentence is in the King James Bible. It is in the New King James Bible, but it's not in the NIV, the ESV, or any other modern translation. And the reason why is because it appears in no Greek manuscript before the 13th century.
Okay, so I'm actually going to fast forward this because I remember critiquing this quite adequately. Now I'm just trying to find that place that I did get to. So sorry about that, guys, if it's doubled up. Now, sometimes when I'm doubling up, it can work out good because I'm focused on Revelation 16:5. I'm focused on the comma, but he did talk about a lot of Textus Receptus issues. So we went through that a little bit. And in the light of what Dan Wallace said in the Ankerberg program. But I'm just going to fast forward this until I get to the point where I'm definitely sure we are onto our newer material.
He doesn't protest the rendering in the text as though it were made to order, but
okay, so I went through all this. And
which three? Where do you put them? Because there's three. The main, and there's others. I mean, there's a bunch, but there's three main, like, argumentative ones. 1 John 5:7. I mentioned them earlier. I said I look at it as a spectrum. I say, in my estimation, there's no reason to believe in the Comma Johannium as part of what John wrote. I've never seen any evidence to believe that it is. The pericope adultery is a little bit different because it's in a lot of manuscripts, but the story moves around. In some manuscripts, it's in Luke. In some manuscripts,
because of the lectin cycle. So the Metzger thought they were omission dots, these amulets, but they're actually part of a lectin cycle where people were reading through the Feast of Pentecost and they didn't want this woman caught in adultery story to be there. So they moved it somewhere else so that they could read that in October. So that's why sometimes it's not there. It's somewhere else.
It's in Acts. And in some, it's at the end of John rather than.
So they make out it's just this floating text that, shouldn't be there sort of thing.
Than at John 7. So the story, I think the story's true. I just don't think John wrote it. I think it's part of oral tradition that made its way into the text.
And so, yeah, that was the thing that I went through last time was these guys think the story is actually real and true. But how on earth can they know that Jesus did this, but then say it's not part of Scripture? I mean, that is probably the Achilles heel of everything that they're talking about.
I handle it a little differently. And the longer ending of Mark is more difficult because there's very few manuscripts that miss the longer ending of Mark. So you have to treat it a little bit more, a little bit differently. Because I would say there's more textual history for the much more textual history for the longer ending of Mark. And this gets to the issue of when you hear somebody say the King James represents the majority of manuscripts, not here it don't. In 1 John 5:7, it's nowhere close to representing the majority.
And so, yeah, people saying it represents the majority. Well, it's usually definitions that have been made up by people like even Westcott and Hort, because they had a minority text. So they would say, oh, the majority, we don't go with the majority. So then eventually it's like, well, the King James and majority are just sort of bagged together. Minority and Westcott and Hort, they're bagged together. And so it's just an unfortunate thing that people don't think beyond that, because there are majority readings that occur in the minority text, and there are minority readings that occur in the majority text. And so in a sense where you can get the critical text, there are some readings that appear in a lot of manuscripts, but it's just the wrong reading, because it's like saying 1 + 1 = 22 or something. It's just a mistake, you know. And so people have worked out some of these issues with just by looking at everything else. They're able to discern that. And so they put these type of mistakes into their text, create a whole bunch of problems, but it is backed up by, it's what, one word or 2 letters or something, and it might be in a lot of things. And this can happen. A print error can continue on, and people don't even realize it's in there for a long time. Especially when you're dealing with handwritten things or earlier printed things. Nowadays it's pretty easy with spell check and all the rest of it, and you just run them through even AI or Grammarly or whatever, and you pick out all these things. But we're talking about early printing, early manuscripts, handwritten documents. These type of things just got continuously published and put through, and people weren't thinking hard about it. And so it ends up in a majority, but it's doesn't mean it's accurate. But then you can have a TR reading, like say the Commuhanium. It's slim, but it's so well attested in early church writings, 95% of the Latin in translations, and also the grammatical internal evidence shouts out for the mismatched genders show that the comma needs to be there. And so you have all these type of issues, and that's, but what you see is the Greek, because knowing that the Greeks have a text that has some problems with it, and recognizing those problems, that leads you to the true readings, because you have the Greek, which is superior. If you had a perfect, pristine Greek, that's the most superior. But when they were doing this type of work in the Reformation period, they had the Greek, which wasn't 100% perfect. They had a few tiny little problems. So then they would also look at the Latin, because we know that Latin was spoken throughout most of the world. Rome had gone everywhere. They crucified Jesus. They were everywhere. And people were speaking Latin, and this language persisted and overtook everything else and became the Romance languages. And then so some of the early readings are in Latin. The church in Rome had a letter written to them from Paul in Greek, and they would have translated that immediately into Latin, and probably all the other letters into Latin. So Latin around 60 AD, it was probably, the Bible was probably fully available up to that point in Latin. And so so that's a very early witness. It's a good attestation. So when you have people copying Latin manuscripts and having early readings in them, yeah, that's a really good witness. So the Greek corrects the Latin polishes the Greek, but they're guided by the writings of the early church.
Majority of manuscripts. Neither in Revelation 16:5, because in Revelation 16:5, no manuscript has it.
I would debate Keith Foskey, and I will say every manuscript has it, but he just doesn't understand how to decipher nomina sacra there.
And in 1 John 5:7, only a few manuscripts late, possibly produced for the purpose of
a conspiracy theory, unprovable, just a rubbish story about Cultish Fortianus, which isn't even in the manuscript that Erasmus used. It was Cultish Britannicus. And
have it, but it's not in the other manuscripts. It's just not there, and therefore, the defense of it to me, if it's working backwards, as I said, working backwards. But
so they got all these different stories, and no matter what you say, it's going back. It's regressive. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. And they're all just stories that just aren't based in reality.
So, are there texts in the King James that should not be there? I argue yes, based upon these things. And the two most just obvious to me is 1 John 5:7, Revelation 16:5.
I'll debate Keith Foskey on those two any day of the week.
At least not the whole text, just a word. Revelation 16:5. It's literally asamenos. It's one phrase. It shouldn't be there. So notice what I didn't do tonight. We're fixing to take our break. Notice what I didn't do tonight. I didn't make my argument about the King James based on archaic words. That's usually the one that people, when it comes to the King, I don't like the King James because it uses, pisses against the wall or something crazy. Like there are phrases in the King James that we just don't use anymore, right? But it's in the King James, right? And there are people who make that their argument, that we shouldn't use the King James because it uses archaic language. We could talk about that. And if you have questions about it, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But I didn't make my argument based on that. And I didn't make my argument based upon my argument that all of the new versions are superior, because I don't believe that either. I said we should use all of them, and we should compare all of them, and we should be fair and be.
There's a difference between using them and like comparing them. Some of them are trash. Try and do a Bible study into Galatians chapter 5, verse 12. Because some people say that I'm a legalist because of my bibliology, and I've heard people say people sort of like Keith Foskey say that I'm a legalist, and but Paul hopes that legalists would cut their genitals off in modern versions. In the King James, it just says that he wishes that those who were like harassing them with legalism would be separated from, not that they would go and chop their genitals off. So this is the problem. try and do a Bible study into that, thinking that Paul hopes that imagine, I know some Seventh-day Adventists, lovely people, but they're heretics, and it's like, imagine. I hope that they just, hey, where's a really nice sharp blade, and they just go home and just do that thing. Well, that is the most bizarre thing. Like, why would you think that Paul would want that to happen to people? Paul wanted them to be saved. Like he was hoping that the church would separate from these people, not that these people would go home and just start hacking at their private parts. But if you read their Bible, I'm not saying the commentary, and I'm not saying this is a Bart Ehrman weird thing, or this is, some sort of strange. This is their Bibles. Okay, so let me just get this up for you, because a lot of people, they don't believe me on this. Scion of Zion. Now, this isn't my website. This is Ken Matto's. Now, Ken Matto's passed away now. King James says, I would that they were even cut off which trouble you. So cut off means, that they were disfellowship, 1611, even cut off which trouble you. Tyndale says, separated from you which trouble you. Wycliffe says, cut away that disturbing you. Okay. But look at these modern versions, CSB. I wish those who were disturbing you might also let themselves be mutilated. NIV, as for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. NASV, I wish that those who are troubling you would even mutilate themselves. The Message, why don't these agitators, obsessive as they are with circumcision, go all the way and castrate themselves? NLT, I just wish that those troublemakers who want to mutilate you by circumcision would mutilate themselves. Can you imagine Paul saying this? ESV, I wish that those who would unsettle you would emasculate themselves. CEV, I wish that everyone who is upsetting you would not only get circumcised, but would cut off much more. Paul's hoping that people cut their privates off in modern versions. Okay, and apparently it's a sin to give the King James to a kid. But and he's talking about bad language, in the King James, and he's saying, well, I didn't get into that, pisseth against the wall. Okay, well, what about this? 1901 ASV, they would go beyond circumcision. And NLV, by cutting themselves off from you. That's the only one that sort of is in agreement with like a King James. Oh no, actually in the context, it's like, I wish those who were so willing to cut your bodies would complete the job by cutting themselves off from you. No, that's exactly what it's saying. But he's added so much more to it. So, but the NLV, whatever that is, the New Living Version, I don't know. HCSB says, I wish that those who are disturbing you might get themselves castrated. And so that's the thing. When I run into someone and they say, oh, so are you a King James guy? I'm like, well, I guess you'd probably define me as that. And then I get talking and I say, so do you think I'm a legalist? And they have a wrong definition of legalism as well, because, if they can't get the Bible right, they're gonna misinterpret everything. And so legalism is when you're following one of the 613 laws. It's not you have a preference for something and you stick by it. Or you like wearing shoes in church or something, or you're a legalist, They just say legal has to do with the law. They just make out any type of rule or any type of standard or any type of discipline is legalism. That could be traditions of men. That's a different thing. Legalism is to do with the 613 laws in the legal code, the law of Moses. Legalism. So I usually say, do you think I'm a legalist? And they usually say yes. I say, so do you think I should chop my genitals off? And they think that I'm like teasing them or something. I'm reading their Bible. Just like the rapist has to marry, or the person raped has to marry the rapist. This type of thing, that's in their Bibles. ESV, NIV say that. Okay, so RSV, I wish those who unsettle you would mutilate themselves. NAB, Roman Catholic, would that those who are upsetting you might also castrate themselves. Jehovah's Witnesses jump on board and say, I wish the men who are trying to overturn you would even get themselves emasculated. So look at the King James, look at the Reformation Bibles, how respectful they are to Paul, knowing that he's not a psycho. He's not talking about chopping parts of your bits off. Isn't that weird that that's what's happening today in society? Seriously, I think the gender inclusive type of thing is all throughout these modern Bibles. And the whole Virginia Mollenkott in 1985 bringing out her, the gender inclusive interpretation of Scripture, and a lot of Bibles have gone with that. The NIV, for example, to the point where James White says it's a liberal Bible. But look at this: you're chopping chopping things off, you know. I mean, you would hate to have done that and then have Alzheimer's and think that you haven't done that, you know. But look at the King James, how respectful. I would that they were even cut off, which trouble you. So I wish that those people who were troubling you were cut off from you, from your, like even Tyndale said, separated from you, which trouble you. How beautiful. You know, like those Seventh-day Adventists who are coming around and telling you to obey a Sabbath, and I wish that they were disfellowshipped from you. I wish that they were cut off from you. I wish that they were separated from you, you know. But then you get to the modern versions and it's like, are those Seventh-day Adventists that are bothering you? You know what I really hope? I mean, I've got a really sharp knife here. Maybe you can leave it on the counter. Next time they come around, I hope that they just drop their DAX and start hacking away at themselves. Their Bible says that. Their Bible. And he's telling you to have a multi-versional approach. Yeah, how weird. And they're trying to make us out as the weirdos. You know what I mean? It does. You don't have to go. Like, seriously, if I converted to atheism tomorrow, I could go to I could go to Keith Foskey's church, you know, pretend I'm an atheist, because atheists can lie, you know. I used to be one. And I could say, oh, you know, I was reading this in your Bible. It says that, you know, just say they're I think he said he was an ESV guy, but he liked the NASV. Okay. So if I said the ESV, they're going to emasculate themselves. What does that mean? So I will read some other versions. You know, we're a multi-versional guy. Okay, NASV, mutilate themselves. What does that mean? Emasculate. And then you're reading, you know, some of these other ones, the RSV, mutilate themselves. A Holman Christian Standard, get themselves castrated. I'm like, Keith Foskey, is this about like getting a knife? That Paul really hoped that these legalists would get a knife out and start hacking away at their genitalia? Is that what your Bibles are saying? Like, can you imagine me being an atheist and saying this type of thing? They'd just be like, oh, what can they say? It's exactly what it's saying. Oh, well, you know, Mark Ward, multi-versional approach. Yeah, right. Making a lot of sense there. But, you know, Erasmus slipped on a banana peel, apparently, and had one manuscript for this and that and all these other stories.
Be honest about every textual variant and look at its history. And as I said, I think there's places in the King James where the variant would support the King James, and I think there's places where the variant doesn't. And therefore, I think we should be honest. This is taking an eclectic approach to textual variation. Reasoned eclectic.
But let's just be honest. Yeah. Let's follow Dan Wallace. He says Westcott and Hort used 2,000 manuscripts.
Reasoned eclecticism is my position. Because there's Byzantine priority,
It sounds so nice. Reasoned eclecticism. So basically that means you follow Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So they got textual criticism, they turned it upside down, and what was covered in maggots at the bottom of the bin is now at the top with all these problems. and then not only that, like the thing that I just showed you about cutting off bits, there's no textual variant there. All the Greek texts pretty much say the same thing. You might get a tiny little variation here and there, but it doesn't change anything of the substance in the TR, King James, or in the critical text, ESV, NIV, whatever. So it's actually how they translate that. How they're translating it is just abysmal. Let alone they've butchered the text. They've basically gotten the knife and cut the BALLS off the Textus Receptus. That's sort of what they've done. I mean, doesn't this show you how who in their right mind would think that Paul was thinking that? Like I know I've shown this quite a lot just for the shock factor of like, this is how bad some of it is. But it's like, just people think that's the Bible. People think that's the Bible. Brandon says, have you had affiliations with our brothers and sisters of the King James Research Council? Yes, so I had Phil Stringer on this program, interviewed him. I have talked to quite a lot of those guys. Some of those guys are at different levels. And so obviously Dan Hafley, he was talking about certain things and he got booted from the council because he was saying that it's fine to have a KJV update, like spelling and things like that. I think the problem was Dan Hafley has some redefinition of some words that sort of matched modern versions rather than what would be considered, King James definitions. And so I think they were like, well, and you're into an update, it's not going to really gel, But I don't see some of the guys on that research council, they like me, but I've done an update. And so it's like, they should really be rejecting me. I'm surprised I don't get way more pushback on that. But I guess, that some of these guys know their stuff really well. But I know like Coombs, he did a video talking about how there was certain papyri that had TR readings. So I actually straight away did a video on it, examined it, and went, oh, no, he's wrong. And then Dwayne Green watched that, or he probably watched his video as well. But I pointed it out. Dwayne Green just pointed it, and it became almost like a bit of a meme against this guy. But it's sort of like, well, you just got to say accurate information. And if it's wrong, delete it. Get rid of it. If someone's proven you're wrong, you just got to admit it and say, yeah, sorry, I'm wrong, and rather than just sort of double down or be annoyed that someone said the truth on something. Because I actually went into the video going, oh, let's see what he says about it. And then it was like, that's not really making much sense. No, that's not true. No, sorry, I can't follow that. But yeah, a lot of those guys, great guys, and I think the thing is sometimes I find with the denominational barriers, because a lot of these guys are IFB guys. And so sometimes I don't venture out into, listening to a bunch of other people who hold to, Calvinism or who hold to other positions or whatever, and data mine their stuff, because some of what they're saying can be viewed as promoting certain things which have been debunked, and sometimes they're just older arguments and things like that. But some of the stuff is really, 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 really good, So, and I guess with any research council type of thing, you're going to have a whole bunch of independent people who have different thoughts about things. And so, and I can tell some people gravitate toward, just doing proactive things in the Spanish Bible and all the rest of it. Other people are more defense things. But yeah, very interesting. Are you familiar with the brothers at the King James Research Council? I like Brother Stringer, Dan Brown, and David Daniels. Yes, I've listened to all their materials. I'm sorry, I meant in the translated to the readers, they knew it was faith in his blood atonement that they were trusting in our Lord Jesus Christ. Yes, they definitely had a good soteriology. I apologize for my comments. My grammar is terrible. Forgive me, brother. That's fine. King James says, such arrogance, they're going to tell us what the scripture is and isn't 2,000 years later. Ruckman was right about these people. They are their own authority and gods. They expect blind trust. Brandon says, I'm sorry. I'm working on seasoning my words with salt, knowing when to talk and when to listen. I apologize, brother. That's fine. I'm not worried one little bit. The devil is attacking the King James Holy Bible, Revelation 22, 18 and 19. King James says the JFB, Clarks, and Barnes all say it means excommunication. Clark marvels that people view it other ways, including mutilation. Yes. King James says those three commentaries and commentators I mentioned were serious scholars, by the way. Clark knew many languages, 12, I think. So Brandon says, wow. Barnes called the mutilation idea monstrous and false. A castrate text. Brandon says, yes, brother Stringer did a video on Patricia Malenkot. Yes, so I did a video on her as well. if you go back through my live videos, and you'll see that it was probably about a year ago now, I think. So anyway, let's continue. I said I'd only go for 2 hours, but I can go for maybe another 10, 15 maybe, but let's continue.
Majority priority, there is TR.
And so he's got, this all worked out. Majority priority, TR.
Only, and then there's reason eclecticism. That's the 4 views, and I happen to have the last one. There's more views than that actually, but that's most likely for you to run into.
Virginia Mollencott. Did you mean Virginia? Oh yeah, Patricia Mollencott. Yeah.
And Byzantine priority and majority, there's arguments about that. But here's the thing: when somebody says the TR represents the majority, there are 1,800 plus differences between the TR that is currently in use, the TR that I told you about, Scrivener's TR. There's 1,800 differences between the in-use TR and what is known as the majority text.
So the majority text was a printed edition in the 1980s. And is it the majority? No, it's based on about 300 manuscripts, not 5,000, because they haven't collated everything yet. And people aren't interested in collating the Byzantine. They want to collate these quirky little things. It's sort of like people being interested in men in women's sports and all this sort of stuff. Let's focus on that. Let's not focus on just achievement and just normal things and happening. Let's focus on the weird, the bizarre, the strangest things happening. And so, but he is basically saying the Textus Receptus disagrees with the majority text 1,800 times, which is true. But the thing is, what he's doing now, he's conflating the modern day majority text as printed by Hodges and Farstead with what has historically been known as the majority text, which someone like Westcott and Hort would have called the Byzantine text the majority text, or even the Textus Receptus has been called the majority text, and it was a synonymous term with the TR. So people would call sometimes the Textus Receptus the majority text, or they would call it the traditional text. And now all of these have all different labels today. Like it was called the Greek Vulgate, this type of thing. But you would, like if I turned around and said, hey, look, I've been looking into the Vulgate, you would think I'm talking about the Latin Vulgate, wouldn't you? You wouldn't think I'm talking about the Greek Vulgate. And so, what am I actually talking about? Am I talking about the Byzantine text, or am I just talking about Textus Receptus, printed editions? And so some of these terms just get conflated. James White, Dan Wallace, they love to do this. They love to play the shell game. It's like, where's the majority text? Or is it here or here? Or they don't match up, see, and this type of thing. And unfortunately, Keith Foskey just seems like he's parroting this type of thing. So A. Hannah says, what is the majority? That is the question. A. Hannah says, what is the firm foundational text that has withstood the test of time? Yeah, absolutely. And the one that we still go to, hasn't just disappeared. King James says, what is the nature of 1,800 differences? I would tend to believe that many of them are minor. Therefore, this is misrepresentation, if I'm correct. Well, the thing is, when you've got a majority text, if you've got something that's 60 on one side, 40 on the other, well, they go, well, we're going with the 60. But all you have to do is find a room in Mount Athos that has another 500 manuscripts, and all of a sudden that can push the other one up to 60 and the other one down to 40, because they're going with majority. So that is in a state of flux, in a sense where it could go either way according to new findings and the rest of it. And also sometimes things haven't been collated properly. So the majority text was based on 300 manuscripts. That was the work of Caspar Rene Gregory. But now, or was it von Soden? I always get those guys mixed up. But it's like now they could find a monastery with, they break down a wall and, there's 500 manuscripts. It could cause some scriptures to be in or out. It could go in the favor of the TR. It could go against, according to the Byzantine guys, who you could, because what you got to understand is the modern day Greek church was just as cultic as the Roman Catholic Church. They had idols. They had all sorts of weird things. They had all these icons. They had the Old Testament Septuagint, they're saying, is way better than the Hebrew. They also had the Apocrypha and other weird apocryphal Gnostic type of things. And so then you've got the New Testament. So you've got to take into consideration that you look at Latin, you look at early church writings, you look at everything. You don't just grab something and go, well, it's sort of like, I remember seeing this homeless guy and he was just reaching into the bin and just munching on whatever he could get. There was just something in there. He's just going like this, not even looking. And I was like, man, it was heartbreaking to see that. But what you see today is people are just going in there and just munch it. They're not really taking into a lot of Byzantine priority. Majority text people are not taking into consideration that they're not taking into consideration that sometimes their text had a certain bias towards making Mary seem a little bit purer than she's just a sinner who had a baby, but it's like, oh no, she's the mother of God and we can all chat to her. And so you can't have her purification. You've got to have their purification. These type of things have to be taken into consideration when you're looking at manuscripts as well. The propensity of scribes to favor a certain variant, A. Henner says the received text, the text that has been received. Yes, absolutely. There was no competing text in the Reformation period. So when they're saying the received text and they mock it and say it's an advertising blurb, well, what were they going to say? Well, Codex Vaticanus is still sitting there. It might be dormant for another 150, 200 years, but that's a competing one. No, this is the received text, the Textus Receptus. That's what people have received, King James says the majority text is simply a variation of the Textus Receptus. Let's be for real. And so basically the majority text is, to me, it's almost like a people who don't want to be teased about, you follow Erasmus, do you, with his rush to print promise and his compromise, and he just put 1 John 5:7 in because the Catholic Church pressured him, and all these silly stories. If you don't want to have the stigma of that from scholars, well, you sort of go, well, I go with the Byzantine, because most of the reasons why people don't go with TR readings is because there's all these weird stories around TR readings. People have made up these anecdotes which are designed as scarecrows to scare you away from a position. So you think that by going back and going, I'm a majority text guy or a Byzantine priority or whatever, that's only a new position. Who had that 100 years ago? Where are all the Bibles based upon that text? You know what I mean? They're not in existence. It's just not even a contender. It's a new fad. And to me, it's another distraction, because then what people do is they don't compare things to the TR anymore. They compare it to the Byzantine text. So it's like these two aberrations that are comparing each other. It's like sometimes it's TR, sometimes it's not, and it's like it's a mess. But that's what they want. They want more options. Tyndale House text, Yeah, Von Soden, that's him. King James says, I think the 1,800 differences is being played up to seem bigger than it actually is, so that you look at their product. Yeah, I mean, there is 1,800 differences. But, I mean, the majority text is that, and that's only looking at 300, a minority of the majority text, which is what they probably should have called it. Maybe called the majority text. This is based on 300 manuscripts, which is a minority of the majority. Then people would know. But it used to be the name of the TR back in the day used to be called majority text. So that's where the confusion comes in. Like if I was to say, hey, I went out and I was preaching the message for 3 years straight in this certain town. I'm not talking about the message Bible. I'm talking about the message of the gospel. So just because something has the same name, majority text, and it covers something back in the day, or it's majority text and it's a printed edition that you can go and buy off the shelf, obviously it's not the same thing. And so one used to be the name of the TR, like the Greek Vulgate, and other names.
Over 1,800 differences. So it's not the same. When somebody says we use this because it's the majority, it's not.
Yeah, it still is the majority in the vast majority of places. In the Textus Receptus, most of it is based on majority. There, every now and then, it's like, oh, instead of having, 1,000 manuscripts back up a reading or whatever, oh, there's only 60 manuscripts that back up that reading. Okay, well, that's a minority in that case, But see, the thing is, their text, the critical text, is almost always a minority, with every now and then, like some weird reading that everyone's rejected, and they go, well, it's in the majority, and they go with it. And they use a majority text argument. And specifically with 1 John 5:7, they go with the majority text argument. All of a sudden, like, we're interested in the majority text, where they're not interested one little bit in, like, Mark 16 or woman caught in adultery. But the Commuhanian, what about the majority text? All of a sudden, it's like, you haven't been interested in this so far, but they just, morph into the lucky chameleon. They just morph into whatever situation happens. Let's just change our story.
It's not the case. All right, so we're going to take a break. I got to get some water and relax. You guys 5 minutes, and we'll be back.
Okay, well, that's good. So I'm going to stop where we had that break. Now, I think I've probably gone through about 5 or 6 minutes of stuff that I actually had gone through. Then I recognized that, skipped over the Commuhanian stuff that I went through last time, and then we've only gone through about another 5 minutes. So what I really need to do, which I didn't do last time, is hide the comments, show where I'm at 103.34, because I was looking for this everywhere and I couldn't find it. And so I just thought I'd just open it up where it opened, and it seemed like we went through a little bit that we'd already covered. But that's cool. What can you do? So we've got about half an hour to go, or 25 minutes to half an hour left of this. So we might even be able to finish this in one session next time. And yeah, so just a reminder to myself that it's when he just had the break. And I'll go through some of these comments. So we have, where are we? Oh yeah, I dropped that comment. King James says, for over 300 years, Europe only had one Greek text, the Textus Receptus, and for 270 years, the English-speaking people only had one Bible that was by divine design. And, I mean, the King James, it wasn't really an issue for the vast majority of people up until, like, the 1960s and 70s. Then people started to gravitate toward these weird Bibles, and, Billy Graham Crusade would just pump out thousands of them and give them to people, so they're all carrying weird Bibles. And to me, this is part of the Counter-Reformation, just to confuse people. Tribal Fire says, in a parrot voice, Foskey, want a cracker? Erasmus bumped his head. Yeah. And so anyway, we will continue on through this. Now, I have finished my Ankerberg series, which was quite eye-opening. So tomorrow I won't be doing the Ankerberg. I've finished that, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing. Sometimes dedicating yourself to going through like an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour videos, it can be really exhausting week after week after week, because what it does too, it then you can't just do something that you really, it's on your mind. Like lately I've been studying into Stunica and the Rhodes Codex, and it'd be great to talk a little bit more about that, or do a whole program on that. But I also want to do marginal notes in the King James and start studying that through. a bit, because TurretinFan wrote an article on that on his TurretinFan blogspot. And I've noticed he brought out one today. Now, I might just quickly go there. TurretinFan. Where are you? TurretinFan blogspot. And he has the Communihanium. So this must have come out just, a couple of days ago. The Pseudo-Jerome Prologue Massive Cover-Up, ? Now, I did a whole video on this when it first came out. Not this article, but he talked about it in a video. And he seems to have gone down this route, which I don't think is really... I mean, to say that everyone got it wrong, even critical text guys, even like sort of everyone has gotten this wrong, except for this Jehovah's Witness guy online. Now, I appreciate that this Jehovah's Witness guy pointed this thing out, but even Grantley MacDonald, who knows Latin really well, he just said it was really a nothing, because the context actually causes the definition of the terms. And so to me it just seems like the omit concept and what was the other word? It was the comment. These just seem to have had a certain type of definition back then, and it obviously is not fitting the context, and so people have corrected it. But it doesn't seem like there's a huge outcry about it or anything like that. And so, and say someone like Stunica with a competency in polyglot, he would have read through this and seen this. Someone like Erasmus, he would have seen this in manuscript form. Like them talking about it's probably the first time these issues are in print. And so they would have been looking at manuscripts and they would have spotted these things and it would have been well known, but they didn't see it as an issue. And so that's the thing. If people who are so very, very good on Latin issues don't see these things as an issue, then it's not an issue. And so so he says, finally, I should add some responses to my friend Nick Sayers, who has attempted to argue that the prologue belongs to Jerome himself, and that the original text was omitentes, or that the word commitentes makes no difference in meaning interpretation for the prologue. So he does talk about it, and he's probably going to offer a response later on. But the thing is, too, TurretinFan just actually going through and doing all this, sometimes inadvertently it can actually help, because then we're like, oh, this one's in the margin, this one's not. And I'm doing a whole page on Latin editions of the Textus Receptus, reading in the Johannine comma and also in the Greek. And so trying to put as much information as possible onto my website. So yeah, very interesting. But yeah, I think I will. Oh, yeah, it says, Anixes has asserted, and I have no reason to doubt him, that the author is a Jehovah's Witness, which would indeed be an example of theology I completely reject. But regardless, he has put some interesting things there. Okay, so I'll shut that down. Brandon said, would you say that these modern scholars don't believe in the final authority? That's why they attack the King James so much. They don't believe we have a Bible anywhere, like in a sense of every word. They believe we have the doctrines, we have manuscripts, but to say that God has preserved every word, no, that they don't believe that anywhere in any language. Some claim it, but that we say, show us, and that they can't. King James says, hey, Nick, in the comments of that video about Pseudo-Jerome, I posted evidence that he used the word canon. Okay, I'll check it out. King James says he is So here's our argument that Jerome didn't write because he didn't use that word is false. Yes, so that's what TurretinFan was going through. Very good. And King James says, don't you love how critical text people give anti-Trinitarians of every stripe ammunition against the Trinity and the deity of Christ? Such dupes of Satan they are. Yeah, well, I think on that website, the Father's True Monarchy, there are certain things, and sometimes it's hard to trust what's being said because the guy obviously hates the Trinity. But I went through, you can search through someone's whole website, and I searched specifically for the word logos, and it only appeared 3 times. And you think for a whole website dedicated against the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, that logos would come up. So I looked for the Greek, I looked for the word logos, I looked for Father, Word, Spirit, and it hardly ever came up. And so he actually doesn't want to mention it, and he just wants to talk against it and call it the comma and this. Like he should, like most people, it wouldn't be a problem to say exactly what it is, but it seems like this guy's even got a problem with saying it, which is sort of superstitious a little bit. And so King James says, all critical text people need to read Romans 1:18. It's aimed at them. It's what TurretinFan does. Okay, so I'm going to shut this down. I'll play my outro. Thanks for joining us, guys, and we'll see you again another day.